It's 2:00. Terry, do we want to start?
Yeah, I'll let everybody in.
Okay.
And then we'll get going.
Yeah.
Hi, Terry.
There's everyone.
Hi, Bruce is here.
Excellent. We're just hello Bruce. We're just getting people through where we want to start pretty promptly. So we've got quite a few people we're letting in now from the waiting room. But we'll start in a few moments once we've let everyone in, which Terry is doing at the moment.
Hi, Tina, it's Rob.
Hi there. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
Excellent, Roy. We're almost there. We're just we've got a few people. We're just letting in through the meeting, the waiting room area.
Good afternoon, Tina. I made it.
Excellent, Chris. You're going to be an old hand by the end of it.
Oh, yeah.
You'll be used to this technology.
Thank you. Hello, Ricardo's here. Hello.
Hello.
I didn't see anything in it.
So Terry, should we start now?
There's one or two more.
We'll probably have a few people joining late.
Paul's on the line. So we're ready to go when you are, Tina.
Okay. So Terry, do you want to kick off and then
Sure.
Yeah.
So hi everyone, my name is Terry. I'm the founder and CEO of Longevity Leaders. I think most of you will cross me at some point. I've been working with Tina on helping her set up this APPG group, and I do so because I think the goals of the APPG are very strongly aligned with those of the group that I lead, Longevity Leaders, and I'm here really to help Tina convene and support her in executing this. So I'm kind of looking after the back end side of things. And with that in mind, I would ask for sort of a few simple housekeeping rules here. If you do want to speak, we're going to have everyone on mute, so if you just make sure that you're on mute unless otherwise agreed. There are agreed sort of lead discussants who know who they are. We will be sending people into breakout rooms after about 30 to 40 minutes of discussion or so. In those breakout rooms, there are active discussants who, again, know who they are. If you are an active discussant, please feel free to speak whenever you want. If you're not, if you're in there as an observer, I would kindly ask that you remain on mute. There are plenty of opportunities to raise questions, and you can do so in the chat function. I know Tina and people are monitoring these, so we can make sure we get through all of them. On Zoom, a few things that will make my job a lot easier is if everyone can look on their video. On the top right, there's a little hamburger menu, 3 dots. If you click on that, a little thing that says rename appears. Can you just all make sure that you have your names as they were sent to Tina on there? It just makes my job a lot easier when I'm moving people into breakout rooms. So just make sure, it also makes sure that everyone else who's on the meeting can see who you are. So that's quite helpful. Another tip, it helps to have things in gallery view. So again, if you go to the top part of your screen, you can see a little menu up there, and you can flip the view to gallery. It makes it quite good. And if you do have any sort of technical queries or any problems, I have myself and my colleague Paul here on the line. You'll see he's marked as a co-host. You can ping us a message, and we will deal with the inquiry as fast as we can. So if you are sent to the wrong breakout room, or for whatever reason you can't get through to whatever you need to do, just ping us a message and we'll sort it out as fast as we possibly can. But other than that, as I said, I'm really delighted to be able to support this initiative, and and looking forward to a fruitful discussion. So over to you, Tina.
Thank you so much, Terry. That's great. So we're still finding people joining the line, but I think we're okay to kick off with. Now, I saw Jeff Filkin, who is obviously the APPG Strategic Advisory Board Chair and the co-lead of the group. You've joined. So, Jeff, I'm going to hand over to you just to set everything up, and then I'll take over once you've been able to do that. So, Jeff, do you want to say a few words?
Hello, Tina, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Hi, Jeff.
Hi there. Thanks very much, Tina. This is the second of a sequence of such events. The first one last week, I think we generally thought went extremely well. It's focusing on one crucial question for improving the health of the nation. How can business play a stronger part in helping more people to live healthy, longer lives? It could hardly be more topical, of course. The launch of our report in February went very well, but then all our dialogues with government were put on pause by the coronavirus, which of course is going to be ongoing for quite some time. We hope to relaunch the report with new evidence on why it is so important at the end of the year. You can see why it's so important, although the coronavirus is bringing us back to something which we thought we had forgotten. Infectious diseases as a major risk factor for one's health, well-being and longevity. Nevertheless, the link between individuals who are more likely to be at risk because of either chronic illnesses or poverty or other circumstances and their risk of getting coronavirus is pretty clear. So rather than coronavirus distracting from our agenda, we tend to think that it actually reinforces the agenda and the imperative for change. And that will be partly what we'll be saying to government when they're ready for a dialogue, which clearly is not just now for good and understandable reasons. So we think we've got a great opportunity to use this process that by the autumn we have clarified where and how and why business could make a greater contribution. And there'll be two specifics on that. The ideas of forming a business coalition to act as champions for better business contributions to the health of the nation. And the second idea of a business index, which effectively was a mechanism for tracking how businesses were contributing both for good or less good in terms of improving the health of the nation. So that's where this event and these events sit in terms of our overall plan. Tina, over to you.
Thank you so much, Jeff. Yes, so we had quite an extraordinary first meeting last week. We had almost 200 people join us. Technically it was quite a feat. It kind of went pretty much without a hitch, barring a few little tiny technical issues. But I think the main thing is that what came out quite strongly is pretty much a feeling that this was the right time to be asking the business community about what more they could do to support the health of the nation. We had quite a lot of feedback during the meeting, but also actually following the meeting through some feedback in the follow-up questionnaire. So I think we're seeing quite a lot of support for what we're doing. And of course the key takeaways from the previous roundtable were circulated. So essentially what we're trying to achieve is building up a sense of progression through the 4 roundtables, really to identify the need, the scope and the purpose of the business coalition, but also with that the concept of the business index to measure good and bad the contribution of business to the nation's health, and to get really to kind of cement this notion that it's not just the NHS who look after our health, it's all of us, and there's a very, very important role for the business community, working also in concert with academia, third sector, and of course most importantly is really the citizens themselves. And if nothing else, let's not waste the crisis, and let's make the most of the fact that more than anything, I think everyone is recognizing how important our health is, but also its connection to wealth of the nation. And that came out really strongly in some of the points at the first meeting. So we're really pleased that everyone's coming together to support us, throughout these 4 roundtables. We're going to be looking at the questions coming through on the chat line. So please do fire off your questions as we go through. through, and this is, very much, obviously, the observers were looking to you, those who don't have such an active role, but of course you can contribute later on after the meetings and of course in the report. So just a quick word, essentially we're doing a bit of scene setting in the first sort of 35 minutes or so. I'll do a little bit of a debrief before we break out into the breakout groups, but we're really fortunate to have 8 outstanding lead discussants, to help really ask this question, how can we harness business to improve the health of the nation? And that very much is in line with APPG goals to enhance healthy life expectancy and minimise health inequalities in this new normal period ahead. So with that, I'm going to start with John Godfrey, who joined us last week, to go first. So I'm going to hand over to John, please. So that's John Godfrey, Corporate Affairs Director at Legal & General, who also was our chair of the Business Finance Investment Innovation Board all throughout the development of the strategy last year. So John, I'm going to hand over to you. And 4 minutes.
Thank you very much,
4
Tina.
minutes. I've got the time wrong.
Can I just check? Yep, 4 minutes. Can
Yep.
I just check I'm unmuted? Can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can hear you perfectly.
Yep. Okay, great. Well, it's a very interesting time to be doing this because we're all sitting here in the business community sort of waiting for a little bit more clarity about the lifting of lockdown, which may or may not come later today. And of course, business is not all a homogeneous thing, and the impact of this in different sectors has been very different. So, things like hospitality and travel have been hit, and traditional retail have been hit much harder than some of the other industries. And the impact also for SMEs has been different for that on larger industries and businesses. But one of the points I wanted to pick up follows on from the first session we had, which is that quite often the commentariat like to take a crisis like this and describe it as a conflict between one thing and another. So around COVID, you hear discussion about this being an issue of economy versus health. Now, in point of fact, that is wrong, because as was established, I think, in our first round table, what this is really setting out is that health equals wealth. And this crisis would have not been anything like as deep or as difficult as it is had we had a more resilient population along the lines described in the APPG's first set of published thoughts. And one of the things that probably will happen as a result of this, or has to happen as a result of this, is that we strengthen the resilience of our population, and that includes better use of technology in care, better housing for older people, better public health, as opposed to intervention at the point when things are at crisis. And our argument was always to shift a large chunk of NHS budget to grow it from 5 to 15% for, if you like, prevention and primary type healthcare issues. The second thing that a lot of commentators try to do is to push this as a crisis which sets young against old. And they talk about the intergenerational aspects. This is a health issue which mainly affects older people, but it will have a huge economic impact which mainly will affect younger people of working age. Now, one of the things we need to do as an APPG and as interested parties in this is to make sure that this doesn't evolve into an intergenerational conflict. We actually work together across the generations and we build on what we've got here. So for business, that plays sort of directly into our role as employers. So what can we do to make employment better for older people, less ageism in the workplace, actually taking advantage of the fact we've all got used to working more flexibly and in a more agile, techie way, doing Zoom calls, in order to make that work better. The third bit, I think, is important for business, which is business as innovators. This will be a disrupting crisis, and disruptive in a positive way, potentially, for tech companies, for health tech, for care tech, for anything IT, and there may be other areas as well. So it's not universally negative. You need to build on that innovation. The final point, with 20 seconds to go, Tina, stopwatch.
You're doing well.
Is that there is an overlap here with the climate agenda. We need to formulate a risk analysis and a risk picture of what health means to us as business. We're doing that in climate. We've never really done it in the health field. So let's have that process going on as it does already for climate. Things like supply chains will become much shorter, things may well become more local. There'll be a lot of change. The work of the APBG, I think, is central in enabling this to be a crisis from which we can learn and implement some lessons. I'll stop there. Thanks.
Well done. And just perfect. Perfectly timed. So with that, I'm going to just mention, yes, you and John, you had mentioned this risk management framework at our first round table, which is an interesting thought, which we'll come on to at some point later on. But with that, Helena Zaum is our next lead discussant. She's the social care lead from Microsoft. And as you'll see from the exam question, we are examining the particular role of technology, and of course that's come out very, very strongly in the first round table as well. So, Helena, would you like to go?
Lovely, yes, thank you very much. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Thank you, Helena.
Lovely. So there are three main points that I'd like to reflect on in terms of the exam question, and I appreciate that from a global tech company's point of view, we are, of course, in a position, in a sense, to commercially benefit from this, but really trying very hard to make sure that we do so in an ethical manner. And my reflections are that it's often quoted that health equals wealth, but I think that we also need to reflect on the fact that wealth equals health, particularly when we are thinking about well-being and social care. And I was very interested that topic popped up in the chat immediately prior to beginning speaking. And as a result of this, though, we all have, of the crisis, we all have the opportunity to really participate in a recast, remote everything driven economy. But it's very important to make sure that everybody is able to participate in that. And whether that is, older people, or whether it's, younger families who perhaps struggle with broadband challenges, or indeed with the finances to allow themselves to participate in this remote everything situation that we find ourselves in, and which is likely, at least in part, to outlast the crisis. I'd like to call out some great work, for example, happening in Dorset, that have a special digital programme to support people with any old technical and digital related questions. And I think that sort of activity is absolutely critical, as is the role of schools, the third sector, local authorities, and indeed business in supporting the business with digital skills. Now, clearly some authorities have had some tremendous success. The Wigan deal is perhaps the most obvious example of making sure that local organisations participate in these, I suppose, kind of kindness programmes or community programmes. And we need to think about the role also of remote business in doing that. It obviously becomes a bit more of a challenge if you're a remote business which is delivering a service to an organisation on the other side of the world. So that's the first point, really, digital skills. The second point is that it's certainly been our experience that when you recruit from a broad church of people, whether those are people with, disabilities, people from different races, different gender balance, etc., then not only does your corporate culture benefit massively, but also actually it delivers a really, really super competitive advantage, because actually, and certainly it's been our experience as we've thought very, very hard about accessibility, we've just realised that we create better products and services. And I think a remote working environment means that there is an opportunity for us to include a broader church of people in our workforce. So that might be people who otherwise might find it difficult to travel to work, for example. There's some real opportunity there, and I think that's part of the COVID legacy. The last point, which perhaps doesn't relate directly to the health of the nation, although perhaps does if we think about mental health issues, is in this world which is going to be increasingly dominated by digital, at least in the apparent short term, we need to think very much about cyber security and privacy, and those really need to be important priorities for us as we think about our digital pandemic response. And I think in particular, we need to be thinking about people, perhaps those with less digital experience, either at the beginning of their lives or perhaps towards the end of them, that those people are kept safe by tech companies, and of course that they have the digital skills to navigate this. And I'll just close by saying that our experience of the crisis has been that actually we get through this stuff in partnership. So working very closely together between the public sector and the private sector is how we are actually able, I hope, to move forward. And I think that those partnerships forged in the heat of crisis also give us the opportunity to have a more kind and a more inclusive way of thinking about the way that we deliver public service and the way that we deliver on an environment which is more inclusive in terms of employment and of course in terms of other opportunities for healthy ageing and older people.
Thank you so much, Helena. That's great. Thank you so much. So Joe Shamish, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, Investment Director at Big Society Capital. You're on next from the perspective of an impact investor. So Joe, are you? Can you start, please? You've got 4 minutes.
Yeah, sure. Happy to. Thanks, Tina.
Hi, Joe.
And I think to start with, just thinking about the exam question for this, I think it's really hard to draw lessons from the global response to consider how we can harness businesses to improve health, because so much is happening, so much has stopped, and most of the really excellent analysis has just been focusing on mapping what's going on, and I think the lessons will come later. But I think there are a few trends that are worth bearing in mind, and really I'm putting aside expectations around public spending and policy here and thinking just more around private investment and foundation investment. So firstly, investment in technology has got a lot harder. So investors now have a liquidity challenge, and by and large there's less money to invest, and there's much greater emphasis in the short term on financing to help as many businesses as possible survive the shock of COVID. So it's likely to slow down the funding environment for innovations in ageing, and at the same time many of the innovative investments, not least the ones that are in Big Society Capital's portfolio, facing really, really severe challenges because they work in close partnership with the care sector, and the knock-on effect of the crisis there. So I think the new normal that we're talking about here is really, really unpredictable, but the likelihood is, as I think everyone is aware, is like severe economic downturn that will limit the amount of funding for new ventures, at the very least for the next year or so. But there are a lot of venture funds out there with what we call dry powder, that raised funding last year and have now got money to invest. A lot of those will be slowing down or taking a pause on new investments and focusing on their existing portfolios. I think we're really expecting them to ramp up again towards the end of this year once things become a little bit clearer for them. And so I think in terms of framing, you've got an overall amount of funding for innovative tech businesses being really severely constrained, but also it's fairly reasonable to assume that health-related technology will be a much bigger share of that overall sort of sector of investment in innovative startups. So we're seeing a lot of tech businesses that aren't in digital health pivoting that way. You hear more and more every day about rules being broken and rewritten to get partnerships for COVID-related response up and running quicker. And I think this will provide some blueprints for new ways to collaborate on healthcare, which will foster hopefully more innovation, perhaps also make it easier for new entrants. I think one of the big funding challenges has always been for startups, trying to give them enough runway to get to a point at which they can provide health-related services. And maybe that runway gets a little bit shorter with the rewriting of rules post-COVID. And sadly, I think a lot of businesses that do really innovative things to tackle health inequalities and improve life expectancy, they're going to fail as a result of COVID, like I said, in the care sector. I think this will also mean a lot of opportunities to pick up the pieces to build new social businesses, kind of harvesting all the innovations from a lot of the really promising ventures that could survive all of this. So I think we're going to see a much greater emphasis as well on tech for good amongst investors and startups, and a much greater awareness of the need to improve age inclusiveness of existing tech-enabled products and services. And I think just driven as much about personal experience as anything else. So I guess the only other point that I'd like to pick up is on this note of partnership. I think what this has brought home is the kind of intersection between a few different agendas, like the agenda of this APBG, and in particular the agenda around the future of work. And so I think that's just going to be a really, really interesting space to look at. Obviously, it throws up lots of really interesting opportunities. Reading back through the notes last time and thinking about maybe creating a world of work which is more supportive of caregivers and those that have to work from home. I think what it's also going to do is create a lot of churn, and that's going to hit older people much worse than younger people.
Yes.
So anyway, I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much, Joe. Just on time as well. That's excellent. And yes, a lot of people are predicting boom time for health tech and med tech. That came out last roundtable. So next, we have an interesting perspective from the perspective of procurement and the business as a buyer. From Adam Jacobs, who's the executive chairman of Bloom. So Adam, would you like to go on next for 4 minutes?
Hi.
Hi, Adam.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, brilliant. Okay, so really interesting contributions.
We don't see your face, by the way. We see your radiator.
Oh, forgive me. My face should be here.
Oh, okay. Well, we can't see you, but it doesn't matter.
My video is on, etc., so I'm not sure what's going on.
Don't worry, keep going. It's fine.
Okay. So, look, this is really boring, but actually there is a massive amount of innovation in the market, and a couple of points have already been made are, well, how does innovation make its way to the market, and how does the market access innovation? So, from the perspective of the buyer, you cannot separate the supplier from that process. There is a dynamic process and a dynamic interaction between the buy side and the sell side. Having worked for over 20 years in and around the public sector market, what is clear to me is that we've got to amend the processes and create new methodologies that enables the market to access and to buy innovation. And that means the ability to there is a procedure in the European Union procedure called the Innovation Partnership Procedure, which essentially offers a great model for buying things which aren't proven, but in small chunks, so that we can get over this, well, it's not proven. If it's not proven, therefore we can't buy it. And that is wrong, because that forever creates a barrier to... So what we have to do is to create as level playing field as possible and as open access to market as possible to enable innovation to access the market. We also, on the commissioning side, though, need to train commissioners in a process to procure innovation. And the way I've observed innovation has been brought during this COVID crisis, if you like, has been not terribly data-driven, not terribly empirically driven. Or if it has been, there hasn't necessarily been the transparency there. Urgent situations and crises do not mean we have to throw the rule book out in terms of making sensible, empirically based and evidence-based decisions. So deploying early market engagement exercises, being really clear that we don't actually have to understand the answers, let's ask the questions in the right way. What are the outcomes we're seeking to achieve? And to really begin to build outcome-based thinking into the DNA of the commissioning process is absolutely critical. We are, I think, in the market here, though, talking about channel shift behaviour. And I just want to finish on the theme of technology. I think is absolutely critical, but technology on its own is not going to be any kind of panacea, because with technology, we need to change people's behaviours. We need to use technology as part of a tapestry of solutions, if you like, where technology its own plays a part, but wrapped around other kind of solutions to make sure we can appropriate the right kind of solutions with the right kind of clusters and segments of the market. from a business perspective and a buyer perspective, it's really important we segment the market. SMEs, small corporates, large businesses are very different beasts with different resources. Let's treat them differently, and let's make sure we set different requirements and different frameworks for each of those different types of businesses. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Adam. So next we have Professor Sarah Harper, who many will know, having set up the Oxford Institute of Population Ageing and is very, very involved in advising government and academia. So Sarah, would you like to go next, please?
Thank you, Tina. I think if we look strategically, we're going to have to look at a 5-year trajectory. This is going to take a long time. And in addition, as was referred to often last week, and in fact Joe also made this point, the clear emphasis I think is going to be on rebuilding our economy with a focus on jobs and well-being, and particularly for young people. But having said that, what we can try and do is put in place structures to support healthy ageing across the life course for all, and really importantly, try to mitigate both inter and intra-generational inequality. That's inequality between and within generations. So I thought I'd try and reflect on 3 broad areas beyond the specific realm of healthcare, because healthy ageing, as you have pointed out, requires activity and well-being, and in particular work, education and our physical environments are going to be very important. So firstly, I think business has a real role to play in designing the new world of work, and this builds on Helena's point. Economists have repeatedly shown that mixed age workforces are the most productive, and that until at least 70 or age 70, work in the modern economy can be successfully undertaken using technology and adaptation. So businesses really have a responsibility to sign up to age-integrated workforces and then put in place structures needed to make this the norm. And it's what we've been discussing: flexibility, human resources, ergonomic environments, and again, just mentioned, tackle head-on the scourge of age discrimination. Secondly, I think business have a real place to play in education, because education in our modern world means we all need lifetime education just to cope with the demands of modern living. So we need education for skills, both within and beyond our workplace. We need education for well-being, and as we all now know, we really need education for health. The UK Government Foresight Report on Ageing strongly supported this. But the unknown question we had was, who is going to pay for this? Is it going to be the individual? Is it going to be state? Or is it going to be the employer? So this is an area where I think business going forward can play a key role. Around 20 years ago, Oxford colleagues and I were invited to Japan to work with a very large corporation to set up a broad educational program for both their employees and their retirees, because they as employers saw the value as education for the health and well-being of their workforce, but they also felt socially responsible for their retirees. So I think there are international models out there that we can look at. And the third key area is going to be the environment. The spaces we live in, work in, where we receive our healthcare, where we exercise and enjoy the natural environment are all important. Now, there's a new Design Age Institute, which is a government-funded collaboration between the Royal College of Art, Oxford and Newcastle universities. And we're going to try and work to ensure that we design for something called our future selves. But the decision has been taken to have a very strong business focus. In terms of the question of global lessons, I think the manner in which the pharma industry and research scientists have come together to work on the search for a vaccine should really prove a possible model for us. But we do have to look internationally, and I thought I'd end with just a few examples of international collaborative work where we've had collaborations with business. A very important one, I think, is between economists and social scientists in Australia, for example. I mean, recently the Australian Treasury, business and international academics gathered together. Among other things, we looked at the basic biological science around the changing and aging brain and how we might capitalise on this for the new knowledge economy. If you look at Singapore, it has a long record of 5-year plans for an aging society, and it's consistently looked at business to help support this. And I think we should also look at our own region. The model of the EU ARGE platform, or AGE platform, recently put out a joint statement with EU youth groups where it called for rebuilding a society post-COVID for all ages. So I think the UK has many possibilities for international collaboration, and I just think it's important that we take them up.
Thank you so much, Sarah. That was excellent, and very well made points about the importance of collaboration with business and academia, etc. So with that, we have Pamela Gallatley, who's the CEO of Healthcare RM, who advises many big companies on health and well-being for their employees, and is actually doing an interesting COVID risk assessment program at the moment. Pamela, can we have you unmute? Can we unmute you? I'm just going to unmute you actually. There we go, Pamela. You're on. 4 minutes, please.
Good afternoon, everybody. Can everybody hear me?
Yep.
Yep. Okay, well, I'm going to slightly focus on a more operational rather than strategic perspective and share some thoughts and learns in terms of health risk management as we actually view it, in the workplace. What we actually do is we specialise in providing employers with an integrated approach to employee safety, health and well-being. And all the data that we collect across all the different benefits that we offer is stored on a single system and has provided some significant insights into how we address all of these particular issues. Our core activities are associated with understanding what the underlying causes and contributory risk factors that influence ill health and injury in the workplace, which I think very much aligns to the meeting today and some of the points that previous speakers have actually made. If I can turn to looking at safety and health and safety as it's generally known, when we are helping employers assess physical and psychological risks in the workplace, our clients not only consider the occupational hazards, such as manual handling, high demands, shift work, etc., but also the personal risks, such as age, gender, ethnicity, weight, strength, fitness for their role, and attitudes, beliefs, and fears relating to their work and life. And I think age is a very, very important one, particularly with the ageing population. You may ask how this is different to common health and safety practice, but in over 35 years of working with employers, I have rarely witnessed an employer that considered the risks relating to each person, nor have I read any health and safety documentation that provides clear guidance on this. Hence, I believe we need to adapt the legislation and the guidance to help employers understand how to consider these issues if they are to do more. What we found from the data that we've looked at is that the personal risks that we identify that have a high correlation with mental ill health, musculoskeletal disorders, digestive problems, and diabetes, all of which are very common in the workplace, they're very similar to the risks of the vulnerability that we've actually seen in the population to COVID-19. Using our data and the information relating to coronavirus, we've developed an automated risk assessment process for employers to phase their employees back to work based on the personal risks of each employee. The software would either allocate a waiver for their return, or if they require a further risk assessment, then these would be referred either to us or they could be referred to a company's occupational health department. In relation to health benefits, we take a similar approach, or our clients do, is whether this is first day sickness absence management, provision of physical or psychological support, such as an EAP, or any other employee benefit. We'd not only assess the presenting symptoms, for example, low back pain, anxiety, but we would also assess the underlying risk factors. Understanding the person holistically totally changes the way in which we decide to treat the individual. Often in circa 80% of ill health and injury cases, the solution is not a clinical intervention, but is often guided self-help, including improvements in nutrition, activity, weight loss, and changing their attitudes and beliefs. This not only significantly reduces the cost of ill health and injury to employers, but importantly helps individuals understand that they can take personal control of their own health and live younger for longer. The data gained from managing safety and health in this way identifies that well-being underpins everything related to both physical and psychological health. But if we are to address the issues, we need to measure the effectiveness of our well-being programs. We must not assume what employees want or need. To help employees, we must rely less on subjective data and self-reports. We need to undertake more objective assessments so that we can measure actual risks and whether our controls or interventions are truly making a difference. For employers to invest more, they need to witness that the barriers to achieving success are removed, and this requires adapting health and safety and equality legislation and a review of taxation. In addition, we need to educate health professionals and benefit providers, combined with educating our people, if we are really able to offer employers a return on their investment and ensure we're helping individuals understand exactly what their risks are and what they can personally do about it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pamela. That was really interesting. So Alistair, you're up next. Alistair is Head of Savings and Retirement at Aviva. So Alistair?
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Terry and Tina at APPG. So Aviva, a large employer, I'm speaking on behalf of large employers, employing 30,000 people around the world, serving 30 million customers around the world. We help millions of people save, and in retirement, therefore age is a real core part of our business. I'm going to just want to reflect a bit about how large businesses have responded so far, and then we're going to look to the future a little bit, and then I'm going to finish with 3 challenges for the APPG. I think 3 positives about the experience so far and through the lens of large employers. I think I would give a tick to the top teams of many large employers. They have, rightly I believe, prioritised customers and employees before shareholders at this time of crisis. And some have put their money where their mouth is. Aviva, for example, did not pay £800 million of dividend to our shareholders in Q1. A second good reflection is the passing of the test of technology. We are continuing to serve 30 million people around the world, and our 30,000 people not working in offices but are working at homes, and that's been done in less than 6 weeks, so well done technology. And the third positive from top management, I would say, is their talk has been in the right place when it comes to health and well-being. They have put meat on the bones of their talk about physical health for many people working at home and mental health for many people working at home. So far I say well done top teams, well done technology, and well done talk about health. In terms of the next phase, is my next section, I would say we ain't seen nothing yet. The so far, I would say, has been the easy bit, motivated by an acute sense of crisis and focus. The next phase will be harder. Why? 3 reasons I think the next phase is going to be much harder. One is about pace. We've had a pace of sprint so far. This must now mature into one of marathon. Very different employer muscles. Secondly, prioritisation for businesses. We have put the shareholder in third place behind employees and customers. The shareholder must come back into the frame for the good of the business and the good of the employee and the good of the customer. That will bring new challenge. And the third, after pace and prioritisation, is pain. I don't think we can avoid the reality that an economic downturn will bring painful decisions for many businesses, which will impact many people. And my final 3 challenges to the APPG is we need to look beyond our echo chamber. I think those on this call today get this message. We in Aviva estimate that 95% of businesses are not on our page yet. I think the APPG needs to be a marketeer. This is one of many seminars that are happening virtually through various focus groups. They will all publish the reports in H2 of 2020. We must not just produce a great 90-page report, but we must have an incredibly powerful 90-word call to action.
Yeah.
And finally, you must speak to the business case, must speak to the finance director, not just the human resources director or the customer director. The finance director will say yes or no. That's it for me.
Thank you so much, Alistair. Very well made points, and we'll take those on board. So thank you for the tips. Very helpful. So our final lead discussant is Claudia Rees, who works with Wayne Channon, who was actually present on our first advisory roundtable, who's a Chief Operating Officer at Cells for Life, and are in the process of developing a vaccine and have gone through the mill of the whole process. I'm trying to get funding with that. So Claudia, would you like to have the final 4 minutes before we go into breakout groups, please?
Yeah, sure. So I was going to talk very specifically about 2 experiences. One is of Cells for Life, which is the UK's leading cord blood bank, which is the company that I'm from. The second is actually our sister company, Stabilitech, which is the vaccine development company. And what I want to talk about is how government can support small business to be able to work towards the objectives of the exam question. So starting from Self for Life, I think what we've learned from this crisis is that regulators need to be able to take more of a risk-based approach towards regulation, which enables companies to keep going during this crisis. Because I think that's really important. Not only do companies preserve the jobs of their employees, they're going to be crucial to the economic recovery after this. And so they need to be supported as much as they can, because a deep recession could cause more harm to the health of the nation than COVID itself. Self for Life in particular had a challenge whereby we were not able to go in and collect cord blood anymore from a large number of hospitals because they're restricting who can go in. So we came up with what we thought was a really creative idea of using our placenta collection service as an alternative for those parents that are affected. And we thought the midwives could just do this for us. The regulatory hurdle that we came up against was that in law, there needs to be quite a complex agreement between the person doing the collection and us. And practically speaking, trying to set that up quickly with the hospital during this time is very challenging. So we went to our regulator and explained the problem, explained what we wanted to do with very low risk. And to be fair to them, they put a lot of time into trying to work out how they could help us. But ultimately, because the legislation was the legislation, they couldn't do anything. And this has potentially harmed 50% of our business, which of course has a knock-on impact on employees. So I think an important thing we could take from this is that regulators need to be able to take a risk-based approach in order to support businesses to keep going during this crisis. The second thing I want to talk about is Stabilitech and the vaccine that they're developing. Stabilitech has a brilliant solution. They've developed an oral vaccine which can be distributed to whole populations without any need for interaction with healthcare professionals, which is really good when you're trying to control spread. The big problem that they've come up against is trying to get noticed for funding when you're competing against big academic institutions is really challenging as a small business. The government's gone some way by creating this vaccine task force, but what we think would be really helpful is if they could come up with some kind of initiative specifically for really innovative small businesses to help them develop their technology, their creations, because I think that's where a lot of the solutions to this crisis will come from. And that's it from me.
That's excellent. Thank you so much, Claudia. So we're running very slightly behind time, not terribly. So I'm going to ask Paul to put on the next slide, because that will frame the task for the breakout groups. So before we... so Paul, if you could go to the next slide, that would be excellent. So the breakout groups, we will have 20 minutes, and this slide will be held up for the whole time. So we've got five great breakout groups. So Ian Carr from GemServe will be facilitating the first one. Paolo Pia will be facilitating the second one. Nathan Berkeley the third. Professor Roy Sandbach the fourth, and Professor Lynn Corner the fifth. We have sort of 3 to 4 participants that have been pre-assigned their roles, but all the observers will be randomly allocated to each of the breakout rooms. So with that, you've got 20 minutes, and then I will ask everyone to come back with our facilitators having 2 minutes to do a debrief. So Paul, would you like to... before you do that, for each breakout facilitator, please make sure you hit the record button at the top left of your screen so that we can record the individual sessions, which are done as separate meetings. So thank you so much. So Paul, if you can break us into our breakout groups, that would be marvelous. So I'm in breakout room 1, and Ian, you're on mute at the moment.
Hi, Tina.
Yeah, so we're just waiting for people, I think, to assemble, but it should pretty much have been successfully done. There we go. Yes. So Ian, would you like to start? You've got 20 minutes.
you. Tina, are you recording this or am I?
Let me see if I can do it. Now, you're going to have to do it from your screen. Do you know how to do that?
I'm just looking for my record button.
Actually, let me see. I've got a record button here.
Yeah, I don't have a record button on my screen, Tina.
Okay, so So I think it's recording. Yes, it's recording. There you go.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's great. Well, welcome everyone to this breakout session. It's been a really interesting conversation so far, so hopefully we can dive a little bit deeper in our little breakout group. Really appreciate our active participants here and also our observers. To our observers, as Tina said, please do send in your questions during chat and we'll gather those and address those later. So if I can first ask our first participant, Harry Brady. Harry, are you online with us? I can see you.
I am. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you, Harry. Welcome. And if you could give us your thoughts, please, on our exam question. We have a chance now to change the rules between business and stakeholders in health. It'd be very interesting to get your thoughts on this, please.
Thank you very much for having me. Yeah, so my name is Harry Brady. I'm Director of Policy and Communications at MSD, which is a pharmaceutical company. We make vaccines. We don't make a COVID vaccine, unfortunately, but we do make a lot of the vaccines that are on the regular program, like MMR, HPV, shingles, pneumococcal, etc. And I've been fortunate enough to work on several public-private collaborations on dementia and antimicrobial resistance. So I know it's absolutely possible. I guess two things from me. First of all, that if the UK is open for business, then business is open to the UK. That sounds a bit glib, but I suppose it's really important that government does throw its arms open wide so that we can collaborate well together. We've seen how many great UK initiatives there are at the moment around COVID. And if you need to find out more, then you can go to the ABPI website, the Pharmaceutical Industry Association website, and find out what's going on there. But I guess that the challenge is, how do we keep that enterprising collaboration going after the COVID situation has just died down? There is a lot of investment going into the UK. It's a pathfinding country, and the investment going into the Golden Triangle of London, Cambridge and Oxford is immense. My company, for example, is launching a new neuroscience discovery centre in London over the coming couple of years. So I think there's a lot of investment. So it's really the challenge is then for government to kind of take advantage of that and encourage it. I think there is a trust barrier, and I don't know how much that's really come up so far in these discussions. And it's a trust barrier that tends to be overcome when there is a crisis or an issue such as COVID. But when the crisis goes away again, then the challenge is, does the trust barrier go up again? And I'd really call upon government and businesses as well to work on reducing that trust barrier. But we know what can be achieved. The Nightingale hospitals being put together in a matter of days is a classic example of what is possible. So I think where there's a will, there's a way. The second thing is to say, to quote the CMO from the Health of the Nation report, the CMO talked about how so many lives could be saved if we use our existing tools as they were designed. And I think that's really important to remember, that we actually have a lot of really great stuff that isn't necessarily optimized. So vaccines being one of them. And we know that we lost our measles elimination status last year, largely because we weren't using the vaccines in the right way. There are health literacy issues, and we can fix that. The business sector can work very closely with the public sector to fix those kind of issues, because those are things around education and health literacy. There's a lot of history of us working together on things like that. There's also a big opportunity around tech that has come up. We know that there are apps that are capable of helping people, for example, do self-care and look after their own immunisation record, but they're not being used. And we also know from speaking to several partners across the health sector that the actual service on the ground could be much more advanced. So we know that, for example, community pharmacy could be providing a lot of the immunisation that's currently only centres in general practice. So again, we will be calling for a massive rethink in terms of access to immunisation, so that people can get their vaccines on the high street, not have to get them in the general practice. But in order to achieve that, we need government and the national bodies like NHS England, Public Health England, to work on that trust barrier, work with us. If they can, I think it's going to be a really exciting time.
That's wonderful points made there, Harry.
For the organisers.
I see it's actually recording. I think someone's already hit record.
But what is the point of us sitting here if we aren't speaking? We're just wasting time.
Yep. So that's.
Yep.
That's
I'm recording. Thank you. Confirmed.
So if there are people who are supposed to have a speaking role, then they should crack on and say their bit, and then we can have a discussion.
So I have just been moved into this room. It's room 3. Hello. Is Nathan Berkeley there?
I don't think so.
So this is the problem. So Nathan isn't here. Okay, so I think what I will do is I will kick off in the absence of Nathan. So essentially, I can see Niamh is on the line. Do you want to, let's go round the tables and answer the key exam questions. So Niamh, do you want to go first, just from your perspective, and then...
Yeah, absolutely. Hi everyone, I'm Niamh Gavin. I'm a computational biologist, which basically means I try and apply machine learning and data to biological data sets. So if I recall, we're to consider business across the 4 areas which the speakers covered earlier. I'll give my high-level kind of thoughts across each. So in terms of business as an investor, I think COVID and the furlough schemes emphasise its role as an investor in, or even a custodian of people. And it's key not to take the easy, these are all coming up to retirement age, they'll soon be leaving, so let's cull them. But instead, as the speakers covered earlier, recognising the skills and wisdom that the older employees have. And COVID highlighted them not just investing in their own employees, but people in the communities, their clients, the customers it serves. So the classic shift in mindset to stakeholders, not just the shareholder mantra. And I think it's key that they do it not just in a tokenistic CRS, corporate social responsibility way, where they just put their hand in the pocket and do a superficial activity once a year, but rather what unique capabilities do they have that can foster this ecosystem throughout the year on an ongoing basis. And those resources aren't, in terms of, as an investor, not just money, but also time, thinking, IP, equipment, whatever assets they have. So this broader purview that COVID has opened up. And I think doing it in a considered way that doesn't reinvent the wheel, but builds on what's already underway at a local and national level will prove to be very effective. Now that said, it's easier said than done, but they stood up and demonstrated that when pressure requires it, as during COVID, working together to build ventilators and PPE shows it can be done. And it's key that they expand the definition of invest and keep thinking altruistically and creatively. So that kind of moves on to the business as an innovator. And, enterprise means enterprising in the sense that they're meant to be bold, energetic, creative, and purposeful. And again, during COVID, they've shown how resourceful and nimble they can be, collaborating with academics, health experts, local authorities to free up bottlenecks, provide capacity and interim solutions. So how do we continue this creative engagement once the pressure dissipates and once the crisis subsides? The underlying need still remains. So I think we need the usual carrot and stick approach whereby we incorporate APPG and the rest into the type of ESG metrics, like the folks said earlier, that we have with climate change and the rest, by which they're measured, as well as making their roles more fulfilling and to give back to local communities beyond just paying taxes and hiring. So that kind of moves on to the third bucket of business as an employer. And I think education has to be done regarding the benefits of an older, wiser workforce and the different work styles that need to be accounted for, such as we talked about earlier, remote working, onboarding, but also keeping in mind that working from home is a requirement for employees, not only those with young kids, but also those, as we said in Roundtable 1, those with unwell partners or parents as carers. So how do they accommodate these carers going forward? And I think the great thing about COVID is it changed the mindset and mindshare to highlight the need to support the vulnerable as a whole, and hopefully, again, business as an employer can continue that going forward. And then I think, lastly, business as a buyer, I think they should incorporate all of the previous 3 elements into their procurement and screening criteria, not just what's the cheapest, best and most effective, but who's kind of creating more shared value as a whole. So I think, to kind of conclude, COVID's been great at escalating a lot of things which are nice to have in a time of need, but let's try and hopefully embed some of those benefits going forward.
Absolutely. No, that's fantastic. Thank you so much, Niamh. And apologies, we haven't been able to find Nathan. I think he struggled to get on the call, so apologies for that. But we have some other individuals here. I'm just wondering, Mark Ashworth, do you want to go next and say a few words from your perspective? I know as from the health professionals' point of view as well, which is interesting from your work.
Sure, and my contribution, I think, follows on very neatly from what we've just heard, because my research interest is multimorbidity, how long-term conditions tend to group together and who suffers most from them. And you've got multimorbidity, which occurs about 10 years earlier in deprived communities, and it occurs about 10 years early in ethnic minority communities. So there's little surprise there. But the message is brought into sharp focus by what's happening with COVID, because it's precisely those groups, the same groups that are vulnerable to multimorbidity, are the very groups which are vulnerable to COVID, the deprived and the multi-ethnic. So I think that debate too is fairly familiar about the health inequalities. But what's interesting about the work is how you start. How do you get on that slippery slope? And this is where business might come in, because it does seem that one of the big starter conditions for multimorbidity is diabetes. And once you get the diabetes, along comes so many of the other things. And diabetes it appears to be the trigger to so much health disadvantage. And the diabetic people that I've been studying, both in quantitative and in interview studies, the qualitative data, is that actually they've got pretty healthy lifestyles when they're at home, sort of. It's at work where it's really difficult to have a healthy lifestyle, particularly if you're doing a 0 hours contract. How much support do you get from your employer about weight loss, about diet, about exercise? And there is a real reluctance in my profession, the medical profession, to ever broach the subject of BMI and weight issues, but that's the key driver of diabetes. How can an employer or an HR team ever get near there? Well, it's sensitive stuff. But my advice to the group is, I think because of COVID, we have to go there, and that business can make, and employers can make a real difference to people's diabetes risk. And if you make a difference to diabetes, you make a difference to a lot else.
Absolutely. No, that's points very, very well made. And of course, in terms of prevention, I mean, the fact that diabetes is the gateway to a lot of these multimorbidities, and of course, with all the aging research that we're seeing, it's really putting a spotlight to that. I know. Now, I'm just having a look at scanning the room. I can't see Nathan McNally and Constantine unless you want to raise your hands. But I'm just wondering, I can spot a few people like Paul. I don't know, you've just made a comment about the exposome and how we need to think a bit more broadly around preventative health. Paul, do you want to just say a few words about that, and just building on what Mark Ashworth has just been describing?
Yeah, I wasn't prepared for that, but yes, some of the things that I'll be thinking about resonate with what's been said by the previous two speakers. So what I made in my comment was reference to the exposome. So this is everything you've been exposed to in your environment throughout your life course. So that's both your geophysical environment, your social environment, how you interact with others within that environment, how threatening or secure it is, how you've been fed within it, what you learn as a young person with respect to exercise, and really how that interplays with your genetics and epigenetics determines your health span, depending on what changes in your exposure will occur, which is at what point in your life. And as Mark just mentioned, diabetes, of course, is a big trigger for early onset of various other morbidities. Business has a role here, I think, both in terms of providing positive health messages, but also in providing salutogenic environments, so health promoting environments, both in terms of the design of the workplace and the design of where we live to make it more health promoting, just enhancing our psychological responses to our environment, making it less threatening, giving us space to exercise. For example, just living in, near or around green spaces, and particularly trees, has a very positive salutogenic effect. And this is from, you're hearing this from someone who's a wet worker, so it's a lab-based gerontologist. Again, the type of food we are provided with, so we are provided with nutrients that support our gut microbiome, so that we produce foods that, again, have more positive health benefits and support a better functioning immune system. And I think that probably, to enable that, we see tech providing a very positive benefit for us currently, but that may not be in the longer term. We do need access to open space, and perhaps businesses adopting more flexible working patterns and allowing more homework will help in that context.
Now,
that's a ramble off the top of my head.
Yeah, no, that was very helpful, Paul. I know I put you a little bit on the spot there, but I think what seems to be emerging, and I just wanted to pick up from Neve's point earlier about the need to think creatively and imaginatively in a way, and just wanted to know, I'm just going to go around and take, and anyone can pop in here with some observations or some points to make around how can we collaborate in a way that will enable us to think a bit differently than perhaps how we normally do based on the lessons from COVID. So we're going to be, so we've got 3 more minutes. So I'm just going to take a few points down in a more free-form discussion. Does anyone want to come in on those sort of points? How we can work more imaginatively and creatively to come up with the solutions? We talked a bit more broadly about breaking down the walls, thinking about health and a little bit more of a holistic sort of preventative health sort of paradigm. Anyone would like to come in there? Neve, would you like to say anything?
I'm just going to jump in. I think that the challenge is ensuring that you always see things from the perspectives of every stakeholder. So to Mark's point around the diabetes, for example, I recall a couple of years back, lots of employees said, great, let's give everyone Fitbits to increase activity, encourage them to walk, help them monitor their weight and kind of reduce BMI. But that actually led to a big backlash of a lot of employees feeling as though that Big Brother was watching them, and it became competitive, so people were at their desks shaking their wrists just to try and win. So I think it's definitely easier said than done in terms of bringing different points of view in. But this is where I feel that what you're doing, Tina, that collaborative, seeing it from everyone's point of view and then pushing the boundaries is the way forward. But I think it literally just comes from opening perspectives and hearing things from lots of different sides of the argument should help a more creative but practical and pragmatic solution to emerge. But I'm afraid I don't have the silver bullet or magic wand.
Well, what seemed... Sorry, did someone else want to pipe up?
Carol Black.
Oh, hello, Carol. Yes, absolutely.
Hello. I just want to build on what Mark said. And I think if you really want a healthier, longer life, I think what COVID-19 has shown so horrendously is that you've really got to start rather younger to make sure that people are not getting diabetes because of all the lifestyle factors that often induce it. And if business wants to do something, perhaps they could concentrate not just on the older person now, but the person who's going to become older. Because there is a really very good opportunity to prevent. I mean, I think what you've seen with COVID is the soil onto which this dreadful virus landed was the healthiest soil we would have wished. And it was, for a lot of people, they had illnesses, which, for many of those illnesses, are avoidable. But that leads, of course, to poverty and inequalities, just as Marcus said. But I would say we ought to think about the people who are going to become the older generation and not get them while we're doing this.
So we've got 10 seconds, and we will literally be thrust into the... Yes, Chris?
Sorry, can I just put in, it's just obvious though, but we need to look at not only the health of the employee, but also the person, the whole family that they care for or look after.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm going to make that point. So we've got 1 minute. So Chris, point very, very well made. We have to think about the person, but also the wider circumstances and the unit in which they are in, and the wider sort of care circle. I think because we've got 42 seconds now, I think what I'm hearing is, and what came out actually in the early discussion as well, is we really do need to think about the person at the centre and really think about their needs. I think inclusivity came out quite a lot in the main discussion. I think there's some elements around that, really understanding the environments and how we can take a much more broad sort of preventative health point of view, bringing in the right stakeholders to really look at this. And I think if we can find a formula where we can bring business together with academia, government, third sector, that will enable us to think more broadly around prevention. I think that certainly will lead us to success in some shape or form. So we're going to return back to the main session now. So we're just waiting for people to come back. I think most of us, yes, we've got a fair few that have come back. So I think just in terms of time is moving on a little bit. What we'll do is we will spend about 10 minutes just with some very top line sort of feedback coming from the groups. So can we have the first group first, which is Ian's group? So Ian, if you could give us a 2-minute debrief, that would be fantastic. And I will be timing because we're running tight on time.
Yes, thank you, Tina.
Thank you.
We'll keep it top line for you.
Excellent.
We really had some good discussion actually, and we definitely could have done with a bit more time. So some really interesting points. So we talked really about how, given the crisis, that initiatives we're able to move very, very fast. However, when the crisis disappears, what will happen? How can we keep this momentum going? How can we keep all this good work in play? We also talked a lot about the trust barrier. Again, referring to in crisis, that wall seems to come down. So perhaps between companies and the healthcare sector, they're very quickly to procure equipment and so on. But when that crisis disappears, will those walls go up again? So some interesting debate to continue on there, no doubt. Great example of the NHS Nightingale hospitals, how quickly things were mobilised. Would that have happened so quickly without a crisis? I think we probably know the answer to that. We also talked about initiatives of using a community pharmacy came up, so using those outlets for vaccines and so forth. So getting things into the community quicker, self-care apps and the like. Scarlett Nally, she talked about employers focusing more on exercise and nutrition. We all know that healthy, fitter people leads to less days off work, etc., more productive society. That was really interesting. And very interesting in the government initiative for walking and cycling. That's definitely something that fits well with our agenda. But also perhaps we need to look at the safety of vehicles. Should there be a code of conduct for employers on how they behave in their vehicles and around cyclists and pedestrians, etc. Olga talked about the new business index, which was really interesting, and using qualities which we use for measuring product in healthcare systems, etc. How can we apply that to well-being and outcomes and so forth? So definitely worth delving more into that and looking at the cause of the epidemic and the impact itself, instead of just looking at guesswork and rhetoric. Really interesting points there to grind out.
Excellent. We'll have to wrap up there. Do you want to take 10 seconds more just to wrap up?
No, it's absolutely fine. Just then we had some debate around those points as well. So
excellent.
Please.
That's excellent. Thank you so much, Ian. So Paolo, you're next. Are you there, Paolo?
Yeah.
Hello,
Can you hear
Paolo.
me?
Yes, you're on. 2
Okay,
minutes.
fantastic. Yeah, so we had a really good conversation with some actually really fantastic participants. So we raised from the importance of people well-being, and but in general, even more so for those in the front lines, for NHS workers that are feeling guilty about taking breaks and ending up, burning out and being damaging their own immunity, and how important it is that they actually feel empowered to do so. And one of the things that we're advocating for example, is music, and how music can have a positive impact in people's life and well-being. Another point that came out was about investments, right? And it was mentioned during the initial part of the conversation how investments is basically in a way drying up during this phase of the pandemic, but how important actually is to invest in early stage projects that are really help and can really revolutionize the approaches to this, and how it's important that we follow on throughout the lifetime of these projects. So it takes time to actually get to breakthroughs in these ideas. We have done it with the genomics project, for example, in England, where the government was able to get to 100k genomes sequenced, and so the UK is actually able to do so if they so decide. And then I'm close with the idea behind the importance of understanding people's immunosenescence. It is important to create a vaccine, but also it's important to understand who are you administering to and how. Those people that are most at risk are those already showing signs of immunosenescence and are also responding less well to vaccines. So it would be important to dig deeper in that and understand that better, and way of doing that. And also about food. We recommend people buy things that are being told they are good for them, but in reality there's no scientific evidence. So bringing data to food and supplements is extremely important.
Absolutely. Yeah. Paolo, that was fantastic. So I'm going to be taking the feedback session for the third group, because unfortunately we didn't find Nathan, and I think James Brown, we didn't realise you would be stepping through. So I've taken your role, James, and we'll find another opportunity for you to step in at another point. But just to brief, so I took the facilitator role for group 3, and actually what Paolo had just mentioned about nutrition, it's interesting because quite a lot of discussion of the group focused on this wider sort of perspective of multimorbidities. How do we start that path? And of course, it's that early stage in life that we really need to be cognizant of when people's behaviours start to get set in train, which was a point that Dame Carol made, and how diabetes, and this is a point that Mark Ashworth made, is the gateway to complex multimorbidities down the line. And of course, we've seen through COVID, those in the poorest health, of course, are those who have been at most risk. And so, of course, this has really shown a spotlight on these wider environmental impacts. So Paul Shields stepped in. I put him a little bit on the spot with this new concept called the exposome, where it's these wider environmental sort of factors that are really, really important in terms of this preventative health sort of paradigm. And I think, and Neve, who talks from the perspective of an investor at NJF Capital, I mean, I think the point that she had made quite strongly was, the important role that business and has in being creative and imaginative and working in a way that can really come up with a very imaginative solutions with that real understanding on the user first and foremost. Chris Jeffries popped in, made sure that we don't forget the care of that person. So we do need to take a wider view on the care and the support that the individual needs in the wider context. So that point was well made. So I think, and I think the other point that Neve had made is that there are often unintended consequences of some of the decisions. We have to be very, very cognizant of that. With, for example, the Fitbit, not everyone really wants to use those sort of things sort of foisted upon them. So we do have to understand the wider behavioural context for these sorts of things. So those points were all really, really well made by the individuals. And I think, and final point really is to think very much from a business perspective on the person who will become older. So, start young and think, from business, really focus on the individual as they grow older and the needs that they might need. So start young, look at the lifestyle impacts. So that sort of encapsulates some of the main points that came out of Group 3. I'm going to go to group 4, to Roy. Roy, would you like to debrief us on what came out of your session?
Sure, Tina. It was a very interesting set of conversations which had a couple of themes to them. I'll deal with the themes as people and programs. So, on people. We've learned a great deal that we need to protect people. And I think that there was a commentary which was very well made that we need to make people safe in their places of work, and we need to learn from that experience in the COVID crisis. Secondly, we have a gap. There's a gap in the sharing of best practice, either internationally or nationally, and that gap needs to be filled if we are to learn the right things from the right people doing the right programs and executing the right strategies. I should also make a point that was a very interesting one, that we seem to have many people in this experience who've got great numbers. We've also got some people who are good at narratives, but we don't seem to have very many people who are very good at doing both, providing great numbers and great narratives together. And that appears to be a bit of a weakness in the way in which this COVID response is being dealt with. In terms of programs, you've touched on this concept of protection, and indeed there was quite a lot of conversation around nutrition, which I won't go into in any detail because, in fact, the other groups have already discussed it. But the concept of zero protection, we're doing a vaccine, it's costing us a fortune, it's very uncertain. However, there are plenty of programs that one could put in place which are essentially low-hanging fruit with respect to protecting people as they get older and boosting their immune response. Whether that's devices or drugs or indeed rather simple lifestyle changes, we must work on that. And finally, the issue of costs, whether or not we should ensure that we don't have a sort of blood tool approach to dealing with older people and sharing a rather lot of money with people in their older years who don't need it, but we do a much more needs-centric analysis of the way in which we deal with problems. And that, frankly, reflects itself perfectly into social care as much as it reflects itself into anything.
Absolutely. That's fantastic, Roy. So I'm sorry to cut you off. I know we're just running short of time.
Room, by the way,
Thanks, Roy. So last but not least is Professor Lynn Corner. So Lynn, would you like to debrief what came out of your group, please?
Hi.
Hi, Lynn.
Thank you. And everyone who contributed to the discussion and to the chat channel. We really had a discussion championing the need to nurture innovative small businesses and startups, discussing on how to really capture their ingenuity and agility to deliver what people want. And again, the issue here between trust between government and private sector was raised, and Anne raised how the health side really needs to change to fit business needs. So really kind of a rich discussion on how to retain this kind of collaborative delivery that we're currently seeing, and continue to emphasise the urgency for this interdependency and how important that is. Again, points raised about a shared language and vocabulary so that we get a better understanding, for example, between commissioners and the opportunities and the what small businesses can offer. We also, again, like other groups, discussed the emphasis on focusing on prevention, early detection, how it's very easy to have a rhetoric around that, but currently investment is not here, and how COVID could and should change that. Very, very interesting in terms of, again, emphasising the partnerships that can be so fruitful between academia and between local place-based approaches, again, in terms of economic and inclusive growth. And then finally, I think we again, like other groups, discussed that this link between health and wealth is just not a new one by any means, but COVID has massively brought this to mainstream attention, and importantly to the vocabulary of business leaders. And so it doesn't matter if we're looking at it from an investor, an innovator, an employer, or whatever perspective. It's an opportunity to, I think, we sort of emphasise the need to act differently and how we can develop and maintain these new collaborations post-COVID, align different interests, so that this kind of interface that we're discussing throughout the whole of the programme between wealth creation and how we have a collective responsibility and obligation to proactively deliver.
That's fantastic, Lynn. Thank you so much. Now, we are running a little bit behind time. So what I'm going to do, I've seen quite a lot of these questions, but I'm going to go to Ben first, Ben Page from Ipsos Mori, just to ask him to perhaps do a sort of summarising what he has taken on board from these 5 sessions, but also just to I just want to pull out one of the questions, there's actually been a bit of a theme in some of these questions about sort of the how do we sell this, the storytelling aspect, that Alistair made, and there's been a few other comments about that. And I know that's very much the business that Ben is in. So Ben, can I just ask you to sort of step in and from your sort of take on what you've heard?
Sure. I mean, we've clearly got an interesting mixture of different sort of actors in this group, and it's really interesting to look at the cross-fertilisation that's going on. I think the challenge is always that in communications one needs to use facts and emotion, and when you try and do the rational sort of people who join calls like this, we're to just tell people the facts, and of course they'll then follow they'll obviously believe the evidence and do something, and of course we know that isn't true. So lots of really positive stuff we've had people recommending the Healthy Aging Hub at PHE, and all of this stuff about behavioural change, particularly in midlife, how business and government and academia and charities can work together more effectively. Issues of trust over some of these interventions like vaccines, which is interesting. Somebody said, can people be defaulted into better behaviour? I think a lot of people would say that they can be. It's the classic changing the choice architecture, changing social norms. We can do all of these things together, but it will be a long slog. And the more that we can combine facts and emotion in telling a story about what a better old age will be like, the more successful we'll be. But I don't think we're there yet. It will have to be simplified at the end.
Thank you so much, Ben. Does anybody from our lead group, so Helena or whoever, would like to make some final points before I hand over to Jeff to do a few closing sort of summary remarks? Just want to give everyone a chance. Anyone? Pamela? Alistair? Claudia?
Sort of something that I don't think that we've touched on very much.
Yeah.
Which is that there are lots of really great contributions that businesses can make, but generally speaking, they will take the course that requires the least action to achieve their objectives. So I think what needs to come out of this is some really sort of clear, tangible action points that align with the objectives of business. Because that is how you're going to get them to do it. If it's harder work than what they're already doing, they won't change. So I think we need clear, specific action points that benefit business tangibly.
Helena, you wanted to come in on that point.
I'd just like to follow on from that point, really. So it's very much been our experience that by including people of diverse backgrounds and different disabilities, different race, etc. Our corporate culture has been drastically improved. It's much more inclusive and empathetic, but also it's having a really positive impact on our bottom line, because by having those perspectives, we're able to design products that are just better for everybody. So if you design well for accessibility, certainly I'm thinking about technical products here, but I see no reason why that shouldn't be the case elsewhere. You simply design products that are easier for everybody else to use.
So
I think, for me, I don't see why a case needs to be made. Older people have a tremendous amount of experience. They are consumers. They bring with them their experience of life. They tap into, into another potential income stream for business.
Yes,
Bring them in. They inform your business.
So Helena, you mentioned a good thing about, designing for all inclusion, should be better business just anyway. And I noticed there is quite a lot of media commentaries around people who generally have been isolated pre-COVID. They have said, well, listen, this is what our experience has been all the time. And now the rest of the nation is experiencing what we feel all the time, being socially isolated. So I think that's a really interesting sort of point. Anyone else who'd like to come in with a final point before I hand over to Jeff? on anything.
Tina?
Yes, Pamela. Hi, Pamela.
I think, with the ageing population in the workplace, it's very important for employers to actually look after this population. And in our experience, a lot of employers do. But I think it's then the behavioural change that's actually needed that is where things fall short. So what we actually see is that older population are more resilient from a mental health point of view. But actually, where employers and employees fail is actually keeping people fitter for longer, so enabling them to do their jobs for longer. And we actually see great results when actually people do really engage in this. So I think there's a lot of people got a lot to learn about how we can keep younger for longer. And employers are willing to work together to actually make this happen. So I think that they just need all of the other things to actually come together for them.
Excellent. Well made. Point well made, Pamela. So, Jeff, I'm going to hand over to you just for some closing remarks, and then we will keep the line open to have a more informal Q&A for anyone who can hang on. So, apologies, we've run a little bit late. So, Jeff, can I invite you to do some concluding remarks for the last couple of minutes?
Thanks, Gina. Can you hear me again?
Yes, we can.
What I might just do is just signpost where we're going next on this, and signal where we would hope for your continuing involvement and support. The Business Coalition for a Healthier Nation is one of the 9 or 10 recommendations of our report in February. And what we're doing through this process is trying to get greater clarity about what might its use be, what might it do, why it would be a useful thing, how it might be formed, funded and run. So this process of these 5 seminars is giving an enormous richness to show what could be done, or how businesses could contribute more by having a better collective voice to other businesses, to the marketplace, the government, etc. In all sorts of dimensions, both as employers, as investors, as innovators on products and services. So we've started to pick up lots of illustrations of the potential for the idea. But before long, Tina and no doubt I and others will be putting down on paper some propositions as to what a business coalition might do. And it would be great to be able to test those with you to see whether you think we've captured the need and the potential and the formation for the business coalition. We think that we'll get support from people like Andy Briggs, the business champion in government, who I think would welcome a wider forum, but wait on and see what we can deliver after this process has run its course. The other point is the commercial. Most of the work by the APPG for longevity has been done with absolutely minimal resources. Tina's been working largely unpaid for the last year. We have got virtually no staff support now because we had to close it down. So organisations that do have money, large or small, if they're willing to put their hand in and chip into this process of building, either generally to the APPG or more specifically to the formation of a business coalition, Tina would be delighted to hear from you. There we go, Tina. Sorry if I've embarrassed you.
Oh, no. No, and I've had... Well, and we've... Thank you so much, Jeff. And we've had amazing support from our current partners, and of course we get, and we've built up a huge momentum so far. So really, really grateful to the community, which we can see already now. We've had, a massive momentum built up, so which is wonderful. So thank you all for contributing. This is the official end of the Roundtable 2, but we will keep the line open for further an informal chat, as we did with the first roundtable, for those who can stay on, just to carry on the conversation, perhaps pick up on a few more of these points from the question and answer. But just to say, we will follow up with a feedback form, if you want to continue to submit questions for the next roundtable, which is on Thursday, which is moving to the next stage. Our final one's on the 19th, and then of course we have a wrap-up sort of presentation on the 22nd at the Longevity Leaders Conference. So there is a process underway to arrive at the sort of final outcomes. So thank you all so much for your support, and we'll keep the lines open. So for those who have to go, that's fine, and for those who'd like to stay, that's great, and we can continue on our chat.
Thank you, Tina, for your help. Can I just say that, as we've seen from policies that I've studied over doing many of the gap work, they seem to look at the present generation and not, as you say, to the future needs of the worker and what they will eventually need. So thanks for allowing me to have my bit, and apologies for any errors I made with muting and unmuting.
Oh no, you're becoming quite a pro at this, Chris. Don't worry.
But no, hopefully I can put a bit more into about working family carers and that. The Business Coalition one.
Absolutely, and just on that point, we did, as we had various meetings, both with Mary Bright, who works with Andy Briggs, on the Longevity Council, and so our first conversation with her actually before these roundtables was very much about how we can align around age discrimination and obviously the whole disability agenda with government. Obviously, once we emerge from this crisis, so we will definitely work with you on that.
I think that's the problem you've got, is the NHS and social care will be literally on their knees, and if a carer's leave is brought in immediately, it will save any more further problems occurring on the resurrection of the social care services.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. Points well made. Anyone want to build on what Chris has just made? I know is Helena still on the call? Because I know she's wearing the social care lead. No, she's not anymore. Jeff, I don't know if you wanted to make a point about that. I mean, the timing from when we can go back in, working with, our governmental colleagues, taking some of the issues that have raised in the roundtables. You're on mute, by the way. Oops, you're on mute. Oh, there we go.
Sorry, Tina, for the delay.
That's okay.
The exam question being, when can we next have engagement with government?
Well, yeah, I mean, because, things obviously got massively interrupted, obviously, with COVID. So part of our plan, was really to kind of go in with effectively a relaunch, to start to pick up on the conversations that we were just ready to have with government, and then everything kind of went pear-shaped with COVID.
Indeed. Well, maybe I can break it down into two bits. I think this is the work we're going to be doing on exploring the business coalition. And one of the things I think that we will want to do early on is when we've got something coherent captured with the help of others, I'm going to talk to Andy Briggs quite soon. Because although Andy will clearly want to check back with Matt Hancock, because that's where he looks to in part, I think getting a sense that Andy sees that this makes sense from both his role and from a business role will be very important in terms of actually being able to build support from it quietly from government. I don't expect money from government, but it's important that government itself is supportive of the idea of the coalition. In terms of a more general conversation with government about health, I think probably for me, and we need to talk to David Green about this, the most crucial bit is trying to land the idea that the agenda that we set out in February is still as relevant as ever, if anything more so. In other words, the evidence that will come out is already coming out from ONS and others about who was disproportionately at risk. Clearly, we need to illustrate that emphasises the importance of helping many more people to be healthier throughout their lives, rather than hope that the NHS will save them at the end. We know how complex that is, but that clearly, we set out the case for that in our agenda. So I think that's what we've got to ensure, that link back to that is clearly made, and to key policymakers in government. That's my lot.
Okay, no, fair point. Absolutely. Any questions or comments that anyone would like to make next? Adam.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, hi Adam.
Sorry, I realised by the way I had my camera on way before. I guess a point that I've observed in the market over many years is how important occupational health can be, and actually the innovation required in occupational health in relation to the workforce, but also in relation to both the provision of occupational health in terms of early intervention, particularly with respect to mental health, or you have musculoskeletal, for example, and also on the buy side, because my observation has been it's been there hasn't been much innovation in occupational health, but it's going to be so key to keeping people happy and healthy both at work and at home, communities. Early intervention, early prevention. Again, forget COVID. Pre-COVID, this was an industry that needs massive innovation and change. And I think the government's got a part to play in capitalising that and providing some kind of rocket booster effect. And I only throw that in now because I know we haven't really touched on it, but it just seems to be so obvious. And on the my side, I think it is. It needs to be treated more than simply a tick box. Yes, that individual is with occupational health, etc. So I think OH has got a part to play here going forwards.
Well, interesting point. Pamela, perfect segue for you.
Tina?
Yeah.
Would you like me to respond?
Oh,
to
yes,
that?
please. Absolutely.
I totally agree with the points, and I think this is one of the issues that we found, which occupational health is in the dark ages. It doesn't really move forward with any innovation at all. And I think part of the problem with it is that it's very stuck in the traditional medical model. And what we've actually found in all of the data that we've actually seen is that the underlying cause and contributory risks are often not related to the occupational health themselves. It's not the business risks, it's not the health hazards in the workplace. It's actually more about the people risks. And I think this goes back to my issues on health and safety as well as the occupational health itself is we need to help people understand it's not just about the business risks, it's not just about noise and exposures. It says if you take musculoskeletal risks as an example, a lot of the problems are to do with the individuals. I mean, circa 10% of the population that we see that are involved in manual handling, for example, that get MSDs are overweight and inactive outside of work. For mental ill health problems, we see similar sort of situations with probably only 8% being active and sort of, of normal weight. And what we actually see is a correlation between as the inactivity and the excess weight increases, then the incidence of mental ill health and musculoskeletal disorders increase. And these are sort of things that traditional OH hasn't tackled before. So I think, this is what a lot of employers are actually looking towards, is to say, how can we actually make this far more innovative and actually deliver results, because it hasn't been delivering results for many, many years to come.
Yes, Roy, sorry. Roy wanted to say something, but Adam, briefly?
Yeah, just in complete agreement, worth having a chat offline. There's a big education piece required, because I think if employers don't treat occupational health seriously, then however it transforms, however it innovates, we're not going to really drive the money. Thank you.
Yeah,
absolutely, Adam. It's absolutely. We can obviously connect you with Pamela after the call. I know. So huge need for innovation in occupational health. I think we're all agreed. And Roy, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, just one thing in particular. One of the issues with occupational health, and indeed all aspects of managing people at work, is that there isn't the link between what the CEO really is bothered about and occupational health, or indeed, frankly, health in general for the workforce. And if we get that narrative, we have an opportunity, I think, right now to get that narrative together. The narrative possibly goes in the context of productivity, where there is, without question, going to be a massive business issue around productivity. For obvious reasons, and there will be a need to maximise the things, work on the things which relate to productivity. One of those is, frankly, absenteeism, retention, long-term sickness, and occupational health. If we can put that narrative together, we might get CEOs to engage with us, even short term, where most of their activity is around business continuity.
So So you make a very interesting point. Now, Thomas, I'll go to you in a second. But one thing that just reminds me, for those who were at the first roundtable, of course, John Godfrey made the point about how effective the Stevenson Farmer report was in terms of putting a price on the cost of mental health on employers, and that's what made them sit up and listen. Once you really phrase it in those terms, they sit up and listen. So that's just a point which was interesting that John made. But Thomas, you wanted to say something.
Yes, I observe, I guess, that these Zoom calls are great. We're able to do many things. One of the things it doesn't allow is for sequential discussion. I don't have something specific for Adam and Pamela in that discussion. I want to talk about something earlier. I want to first compliment you folks on the Health of the Nation report from February. I thought it was a terrific report.
Thank you.
This is from the perspective here on the other side of the pond. We're actually seeing you guys as a couple ridges higher up on the mountain, seeking the summit. We're trying to do similar things with the U.S. Congress, and we're also stuck, obviously. Congress is completely consumed with COVID-19 and the economic consequences of reopening and so forth. But I am interested in asking this group how to solve the educational problem of motivating the public and the aging and the law and policy makers about the benefits and the attractiveness of healthy longevity. I personally was surprised. I would have thought that most people would want longer life, and of course they naturally think in terms of 30 years of declining mental capacity and physical debilitation, so they're not that uniformly interested. When we tell them, no, we're talking about health span, so you'll be fine, they say more hands go up. But I think most people think about a nonagenarian in a wheelchair when they think about healthy aging, and we're trying to apply the advances of geroscience and suggest, no, the vision is, think of yourself as a middle age of 40 to 60, living your life, engaged and active and independent and so forth. How are you folks finding it in the message amongst the British? Because we're having a hard time amongst Americans.
Oh boy. Well, I don't know. I can see there's probably a few people here who could have a really good start on that question. I'm looking to Lynn first of all. I don't know, Lynn, if you want to, Lynn Corner first, want to comment on that. But that's our biggest challenge, in the APBG, is the whole cultural piece around how we see growing old in the UK.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that the report did so well was to kind of highlight that ageism as a self-fulfilling prophecy, and actually that we need a much more positive dialogue with kind of through the life course about what an amazing opportunity it is, but people still kind of revert to seeing kind of older age as a trajectory of decline, rather than thinking of it as something that actually at every stage we can do so much. It's so malleable. So I think we are also wanting to have that dialogue, Thomas, and I think again, we've mentioned it so much about the need to start earlier. That we need to kind of engage in education through the workplace, through a myriad of different sources, to make sure that the benefits and both the collective responsibility and the individual responsibility for better, longer lives, if you like, because I think there's so much that individuals can do, but of course people need support, and I'm always very keen that the conversation is not just about the currently healthy getting healthier. We must, I think one of the real benefits of the APPG report was that it absolutely put the emphasis on inequalities, and that in the States, it doesn't matter which country you're in, but especially in the UK at the moment, that's got to maintain that focus.
Yes, absolutely. I points very, very well made. But Thomas, I know Lynn Cox, you're in this environment of just looking at the sharp end of the science of aging. So I think there's a very interesting kind of discussion, happening about what science is revealing about how malleable aging is, and how you can actually really, really delay the process of the multimorbidities, etc., which I know Mark Ashworth had made the point very, very well in terms of these complex multimorbidities, with often diabetes being the gateway. These are all ways we can manage those far earlier, upstream at a far earlier age, and I think most people don't really understand that until it's way too late. So that's a core message. So I think what was interesting about the meeting today, and I think this is the real challenge, challenge. It's about the message and getting these messages out. And I know the big task, in terms of the general public, obviously we need to get the media, and once we formulate sort of our whole sort of approach with where we want to take, for example, the business coalition, I think we have a job on our hands to really, it is about that message, about what is it that we, want to do in terms of, promoting, a much more positive view of growing old and what you can do to keep healthy and well. And as part of that, dealing with the inequalities that are keeping people trapped in ill health, which of course has been very much highlighted by the whole COVID crisis. I don't know if anyone wants to sort of comment on that. I know there's a few. Hi, Adrienne. Hi there.
Just very quickly, I think there's a very easy business case to be made for just what you said, and I think it does have to be made. Businesses around the world spend more money on marketing, advertising, and PR. And the messages that are going to get across to the average individual is going to come through that. And if we can have a coalition and a concept that if you sell aging to younger and younger people, you will make money. I'm going to give you a very, very crass example. The fastest demographic is 26 years old because the desire is very much. They want to look good.
We're losing you a little bit. You said okay. Something about the 26-year-old.
Yeah, the fastest growing demographic are using Botox and fillers. 26-year-olds.
Oh my goodness.
They've gotten a message. They've gotten a message that even if they're in the wheelchair at 90, they want to look good. Now, I don't know if you're still hearing me all right.
Yes, we can. We're hearing you.
So we need to co-opt the thinking of younger people that it really is worth growing old, and they will buy things, do things, change their behavior to grow old successfully. So there is definitely a combination of business messaging, health messaging, and wellness messaging. And I hope there's going to be a lot of messages coming out of what you're doing right now. And I just that they're not all framed for the older adult. And they're not all framed for they're framed for the younger person to see aging, I wish there were a better word for it, but part of their personal goals. Just like they see looking good as part of their personal goal.
Well, and I think you made the really good point that we're all motivated by different things. And, sometimes, the youth, the looking good thing is obviously what will, motivate people to change their habits. I mean, I only have to look. In fact, one of the members in the group who's not here at the moment, Anastasia Georgievskaya, who runs Hout AI, which is an AI sort of aging biomarker business. And so she's using sort of, you can tell through the quality of your skin, how old you are. And for some people, that will be a huge motivator, whether you like it or not. Keeping healthy inside often shows up on how you look outside. So that could be a huge motivator for some people. So it comes back down to, as you point out, Adrienne, what is it that motivates us to change our behavior? But I think, so these are all the sorts of things from a behavioral change perspective, are very complex and obviously are critical, to get right, to be, and also to certainly from the APPG's point of view, we do want to make sure that, the message and what we're trying to do reaches all people and deals with this very, very difficult problem that we've got in the UK, but also in the US, where we have these huge health inequalities. So it's complex. I don't know if anyone else has anything to add to that. Bruce.
It's Bruce.
Yeah.
Just on a slightly different end of that, I think two things. One, your coalition, I hope it engages startups who are driving innovation as a voice.
We will.
Really important. I also think that innovation in healthcare, especially we're focused on dementia therapy and dementia care, needs to focus on not just, there's a lot of money going into early detection, which is wonderfully important, but doesn't do anything for someone who has dementia. So the care, there needs to be a lot more innovation focused on the care, and I actually think that's where startups can really have a huge impact. So it's important that we're focusing the innovation in the right place, and I think where it can make the most difference, improving quality of lives of patients and carers today, that's where we need more innovation.
Yeah, points very well made, absolutely. Anyone who wants to build on that Bruce has just said? Manfred.
Yeah, I may sound like a broken record, Tina, but I think we need to build on the basis.
Yeah.
And things like Botox and so are very important, of course, to look younger, but we need to work as well. It's not healthy aging starts basically when we are young. So prevention will be an important part, and the right lifestyle, not to smoke, and the right nutrition will be very important to build on. The key point here is as well, of course, we don't seem to have the incentives for aspects like prevention and also early detection. And both go hand in hand here because on the therapeutic side, we have the incentives and we know things that work and things that don't work. On the prevention, there's a dilemma. We don't have the incentives and we should not look to treat aging. We should make it healthier and start early.
Vanessa, did you want to say something? Hi, Vanessa. Oh,
hi.
There we go. Hi.
I may also sound like a broken record, but like I was saying in our group, if you think of the analogy of a car, you would never think of putting diesel in your petrol car or petrol in your diesel car. We all know this is very expensive, complete disaster, nightmare. And unfortunately, we seem to have an epidemic of putting the wrong fuel in the car. That's the problem. Botox is not a solution. All of these, these things that come after, the most important issue is putting the right food back to basics, exercise in this card, this organic card, which is a much more sophisticated machine. And whether it's on this side of the pond or the other side of the pond, I think this is where we really need to put our heads together. How is business going to help this? It's a pure matter of the responsibility felt by the individual. And I think, the support needs to come from all angles, from the government, in terms of, like I said in the group, we taxed cigarettes back in the day, taxing sugar, I don't know, in the same light. And for business, it's going to come in terms of innovation. It's going to come in terms of, taking care of the employers through offering appropriate foods at work, and all of the HR subjects in that line. But ultimately, it comes from putting the right fuel in the car, first and foremost.
So that's a point very well made, Vanessa, and that actually came out a few times actually in the chat lines as well throughout earlier on about nutrition and what you eat. And I think there's so much, and I know Manfred, is very involved in this, and indeed some others. But and this is actually a point that Paul Shields actually was making earlier in the breakout group. I sort of put him a little bit on the spot about this concept of the exposome. He's doing a whole bunch of really interesting work on the gut, leaky gut, and all these sorts of things which are fascinating and are really starting to come into its own in terms of research that's really driving how we think about our lifestyle, nutrition, its impact on our genetic expression, all these sorts of things are really starting to, become really interesting issues. Anyone want to, so Lynn, you want to say something?
I completely agree with absolutely everything Vanessa said, but I worry about fatalism in certain communities, particularly working class men. You probably saw the stats today that working class men are the most likely to die of COVID. And there's social deprivation, but there's also a lot of choices made. So it's quite interesting if you go out, well, you can't anymore, but go down the pub for an evening and see what people choose to eat. And it's the white working class men who are on the pie and chips and the huge portions. It's not that there isn't the availability of salad. There's a certain mindset that goes with it. So there's a macho mindset, there's a fatalism mindset. And there can be a different set of role models. So the Botox is good maybe for some women, and maybe looking good on the outside is a way of being good on the inside. But if your drivers are different, then it's actually very difficult to overcome those. And in a whole groups of society, the drivers are very different. It's going to be young kids being out, being macho. It used to be smoking, now it's bragging about drug taking. There are a whole lot of other drivers, particularly in deprived areas, that make it very hard to get health messages taken on board. And I don't have a solution. I just see that as a huge problem.
Yeah. Mira?
Can I just jump in quickly?
Of course.
There's a very interesting caree relationship that when it's the youngster, say the 35-year-old CEO of a startup looking after their older parent, and they need to be able to communicate with them and so on and so forth, and they are remote, then a lot of this technology will kick into place because the carer will make sure that their parent is looked after properly, that there are, let's say, invisible cameras to make sure that the care is proper, that there are sensors in place, that they are called up if their parent hasn't got out of bed. It has a flip side that they get lazy as well, that, you know, they need to be reminded to go and visit. And but as far as food goes and all of that, they could set enough startups now send in food, fresh fruit and vegetables, that the carer could make sure that the parent gets, rather than having to go to the supermarket. And then all the social side that goes with that are they alone too much? But then they can have a company and so on and so forth. And that works. You get a cuddly bear to be a robot to wander around with them.
So, Mira, you raise a very important point. Ooh, sorry. So I had to unmute because I was hearing a bit of an echo. So Mira, you raise a very, very good important point also, which was mentioned a couple of times earlier in the main discussion about unintended, or certainly in the breakout group I was in, about unintended consequences. You know, because sometimes, you know, on the face of it, something seems absolutely perfect and wonderful, you know, for the quote unquote user, but actually, if it means that they're getting fewer face-to-face, you know, visits because there's this comfort from the person who used to visit them, then actually that might be more detrimental. So it's like anything, you have to be really, really careful about all the unintended consequences of these technologies. But I think, you know, already we have seen, well, I think most of us will have seen a huge dramatic increase in digital literacy across the nation. And one of the things with that, of course, is that you worry, and I only have to look in my own family, my in-laws, you know, they still are very, very digitally, you know, disconnected. I mean, they do not use digital technology. So you sort of worry that actually it might even create a bigger problem where we have people who are, you know, those who are, you know, getting more of a and can, you know, start using these technologies. But then there's this group that's even further left behind in terms of that. So I think, you know, we always have to be really, really careful, you know, with all of our assumptions about this. I think, you know, clearly there's massive, massive scope, and already we're seeing the role of technology being able to do a massive amount of good. And that, of course, is what we want to focus on in the group moving forward, because clearly technology does have a role to play, but we need to do it in the right way. Any comments on that point? Or anything else that someone wants to raise that we haven't talked about yet in the group, which does need to be aired? Richard, you wanted to say something?
If I may, yes. And just going back to the food.
Yes.
And particularly the working class men in deprived areas. I think there's a general feeling that when you listen to what's actually being said, it's in essence we live in a nanny state. There's 20-mile-an-hour speed limits everywhere, and I get nicked if I do 25 in my Ford Escort with my Go Faster stripes. As everything's controlled, therefore, if something is allowed, it's obviously okay. Because the nanny state is regulating, health and safety, they're cutting down inca trees in Ealing in case a conker falls on someone's head. So the whole thing comes around. So if it isn't being banned and it is allowed and it's on sale in Tesco's or it's in the pub, then it must be all right, because everything that might do me any harm, like a conker falling on my head, is taken care of. So I think it's okay with impunity. That's the thing, and it's got a nice kind of logic to it as well. So I'm going to shut up now.
No, but you raised a really good point, because obviously in our first roundtable we looked at this whole kind of tension between, we're already seeing obviously heavy state intervention at the moment just to kind of deal with this sort of crisis, and there's this, do we want to go down that road using policy and legislation, regulatory frameworks to force business to do something, or, which is the other point that was raised very, very, as a very important point, is, good business should lead to good business. That was the point that Richard Boland made. Of course, social impact is going to become more and more a key driver for corporate behavior, because it will lead to higher returns, because the consumer, the citizen, will want to buy from those sorts of businesses, and those businesses who do, it's the fundamentals of responsible business, that should lead to more business, as it were. So maybe, so we may not need the government to, so these are all the sorts of things that we need to really, really understand as we move forward through this process. What will encourage business? Is it government that forces them, with a stick approach, or is it the consumer who's going to buy more from them because of good sense? So these are the sorts of things that really we have to unpick and understand. Any comments on that? Because this is what we ultimately are trying to do, is what is this new social contract going to look like, in this new normal environment? What is it going to look like, and how can we encourage and stimulate this, is the big question, really. I don't know if anyone has a comment on that, but it's a tricky one.
I do have one thought on it, if I may, and that is, you get it trickle down. Trickle up is pretty hard. The trickle down is relatively easy. And there's an opportunity at the moment, in particular, for the leaders of large companies who are primarily over 45 and maybe 55 to 65, and are going to really have to do more over the next 3 years than they've ever done before. And I know some of them are thinking, I thought I was just coasting towards the end, and this will probably kill me, but I've got to do it. But for those people to take this on, of getting themselves back in the best possible physical and mental state, so they can get this ship, this organisation, whether it's a university or a company or whatever, through the period safely, and come out the other side of it healthier and better, not broken as they would expect. Because there's an expectation among people that higher performance is correlated with less life, more breakdowns and the rest of it. It's as is true in car engines and everything we normally see. Anything that's higher performance normally pays a price. But in this, by reversing the age-related decline, actually reset the brain and stuff back to where it was at no cost. You don't pay the cost that you pay with stimulants. So going from the top and having these people say, this is amazing, I am actually running this organisation and that's not breaking me, and having that trickle down through the management layers to the worker layers and then outwards from there. There's a way of doing it. So that's what I'm working on at the moment. It's not the overall problem, but it does obey the basic rules, trickle down from the aspirational few to the rest of the people, and show by example.
Yeah, and you're talking about sort of a corporate culture and corporate visioning, as it were, and actual sort of saying what walking the walk, as it were, as well.
I think these old people really do, and not leave on a failure, and not leave broken by their success either. That's the driver for them. And then it has all these other added benefits as well. Absolutely.
Anyone else wanted to raise anything that you feel we haven't addressed adequately so far? Because it's obviously quite tough, sort of fitting everything into an hour and a half. because it's because what came out really, really strongly. I mean, I think this whole idea of the risk management framework that John Godfrey mentioned the first roundtable is quite interesting in terms of focusing the mind, as is indeed the case with the climate change agenda. Sort of really focusing on SDG goals, etc. I mean that and a way in which we can prioritize how we approach this. And we're obviously going to be examining that in more detail in the next roundtable, the SDG goals and other indices, and we'll have some people, there who've actually been developing their own indices. But any further thoughts on just this sort of, prioritization sort of approach, Manfred?
Just one thing. I think all around the table here, this virtual table, there are lots of facts here. Putting this together, I think we know so much. We need to find the key to strike the right balance between this nanny state and also keeping the individual freedom. That is, I think, one of the big challenges. And then creating the right incentives of doing so. But one thing I've seen as well, then again, I come from pharma, but moved to nutrition many years ago. We know all of this. What does it take to implement it? It is really that stage we know how to assess things. We have all the knowledge, and it's multifaceted, as we have seen here. And there's a lot of knowledge around the table. What does it take to implement? I give you one example. I live now. I'm not Swiss. But I live now here in Switzerland for many years. I lived in many different countries in the world, and in a so-called well-developed country like Switzerland, you have 50% of the elderly admitted to a hospital are malnourished. That is already bad. And then even worse, 50% of the ones leaving the hospital who were well nourished before leave the hospital malnourished. This is linked to many different things, to the state of the disease, the state of being single, living without a partner now, and all of this. And so what does it take to really get us from the knowledge, and that is, we know that for decades already, what does it take to implement this, to get over that hump? And I think here we may not all have the facts and the knowledge, but the knowledge per se is there.
So I agree with you, and obviously that's what we're going to be looking in more detail at the next roundtable. But is there anyone here who can comment on that, sort of frameworks or indices or these sorts of tools that can help us implement, this sort of more socially responsible sort of business approach where we're really focusing on health and well-being? Any comments on that? So Robert, you just need to unmute yourself. Hi, Robert.
Thanks, Tina. Forgive me, I had to absent myself for a short while.
Don't worry.
Formal
Thank you.
But
Thank you for joining back.
Sorry?
Thank you for joining back.
Well, I was loving it, and I'm loving it again now.
Excellent.
Thank you, in particular, Tina, for making all this possible.
You're welcome. Thank you.
A key question for me on this issue is that we have enormous amounts of technical capability. We have enormous amounts of data. We have enormous amounts of incentive in the private sector, theme of this gathering, to drive these things such that they deliver products and services for society which are desired and of benefit to all. But we're just not joining dots in so many parts of this, between public and private sector, and indeed sector and academic sector, but also between the different parts of society. And I'm just one example of an area where I think, for instance, we could make some massive progress because it's all sat there waiting to be joined up, is if big food retail were to join together with preventive health. We've had so many references to this implicitly and so on, and explicitly, and say, okay, let's help people just simply to join the dots in their own personal lives, particularly those who are least well placed to have the information that they might need around nutrition and lifestyle, and say, look, would you like to come along to a Tesco-funded workshop on nutrition, lifestyle, exercise, and the issues of obesity, the issues of type 2 diabetes, the issues of mental health in families and so on, and find out just how much healthier and more happy and productive you could be in life if you were to make these connections between what's in your shopping trolley on a Friday and what's happening in the rest of your life.
You have made some very interesting points, and interestingly, so nutrition has come up quite a lot in today's roundtable anyway. But actually, on Thursday, we've got David Luckin, who actually was on the call earlier, who's in charge of the Co-op's Wellbeing Index. So it'll be really interesting to hear from them how they've been approaching this, because they've been doing some interesting work. But we've also been in discussion with some local areas. So Jeff and I had a really interesting call of I think he was a public health director. I can't remember his exact title, up in I think it was Liverpool, so quite a deprived area. And all the work they were doing at a local level, working with the supermarkets and incentivizing, healthier behaviors, and they had an award scheme, and all these sorts of things, which I'm sure is probably what we'll hear a bit more of, with Dave Luckin on Thursday. I think there's a massive role, and this is something that we need to look at more closely moving forward, is the role of the big food retailers, to involve them. And one of the other people who we've got involved, although we need to formalize it a little bit, but we know and probably many of you know, Tim Spector, who's been doing a lot of work, in nutrition and calling out the food industry. In fact, some of his books are all about, the bad behavior in the food industry. And of course, he's got a new book coming out next month. There you go. Yes, Diet Myths, and he's coming out with another book soon. So we need to really look at this, because obesity and behavior in young people is at the root of so much of this. Is poor nutrition, processed food, all the marketing and stuff that we hear from the food industry, and all these sorts of things. So we really need to look at that quite closely, because it's a massive element of all this. So I think you made a really important point, Robert, and I think that's something that we do need to examine in more detail as we move through these groups. And because we talk a lot about sort of negative and positive commercial determinants of health, and there are certainly many, many negative commercial determinants of health, and we know that about tobacco. But boy, there's a whole bunch of other industries involved here as well. So these are the things that we need to do much more and be quite heavy with, and this is where the social responsible business argument really comes in, and where we can really help promote those healthy messages, and we've been talking a lot, and Lynn will know this, Lynn Cox, getting the message out and starting early in schools. So Lynn and I were at a program at a school a couple of months ago, and because just getting that educational message. In fact, we've got some of the sponsors from this group who are actually interested in supporting some education in schools, which would be fabulous. And looking at this link, we've called it sort of living green or living longer, but it's this climate change, healthier eating, healthier, travel, all these sorts of things are really, really massive opportunities, which came out quite strong in the first roundtable, and indeed were some threads of heavy discussion when we were coming up with our strategy last year. So I think that's, so I agree with everything you said, Robert. And any comments from the group here, because it's a massive area I think we need to look at. Yeah, Alex. You just unmute yourself. Yeah, hi.
I'm in. I just keep wanting to bring up the subject of imagery and positive imagery, and the kind of images that we've got out there in the public domain around aging. And as I think I take photographs of competitive athletes in their 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and 100s. And I was just thinking about the last exhibition I had, which was in a public space in Bristol, so it was free to everyone. And a little girl of 8 was looking at some of the pictures, and she said to her grandmother, "This just shows that I don't have to grow old like an old person." And the idea of seeing somebody of 90 doing the long jump or the high jump, or a 103-year-old sprinting, it does transform people's expectations, and the bar is so low at the moment in terms of, I think, health carers too, in what they expect of older people.
Yeah.
So I'm facing a hip operation myself, a hip replacement, and somebody implied that afterwards, it would be nice for me to be able to, I'd want to pop to the shops. Well, no, actually, what I want to do is carry on traveling around the world and photographing these athletes that I've photographed. I'm 70.
Yeah.
And so you want to raise the expectation. And if you can see somebody of 90 doing the long jump or the high jump, it changes it's only a soft sell, but alongside all the other things you're talking about, I think it can make a contribution.
So I think you made the really good point, Alex, about aging is malleable. There's so much that we can do to change the course, but the earlier you start, the better. So I think this is where the early message is so key. I mean, you can do, and I didn't see Muir Gray on the line. I thought he was joining, but Muir, of course, is very, very big on this message that there's something you can do at whatever age you do. Like even if you do strength training exercise in your 90s, that might give you another 3 months, of healthy life expectancy or whatever. Being quite ruthless about it. But the whole point is that the earlier you start, but it doesn't matter even at whatever age you start, there's something you can do to make to help impact, positively on your health and the quality of your life. And I think these are really, really important, and how much we can do, ourselves, to change that trajectory. Alex, yeah.
There's been some evidence that if you show 80-year-olds pictures of ordinary 80-year-olds and you show them pictures of 80-year-olds doing the high jump or the hurdles, it doesn't inspire them.
No.
Because they just think,
it's impossible.
Yeah. But if you show that those same images to people 15 or 20 years younger, then that inspires them and makes them change their perception about what growing old could all be about. So, useful in that regard.
Yeah. But imagery is important. I think expectations setting and aspiration. But I think we're coming into a time the baby boomers. I mean I'm that sort of cusp of sort of baby boomers, Generation X. Born in 1964. But the baby boomers. They are very different. I mean they have different ideas about old age than the previous generation. So I think there's a bit of a we've seen that. I think I mentioned last week. We've seen that in the press. Actually, this whole idea that the over 70s should be the only group that's kind of that has to be kept in lockdown. Is horrific. For those who are 70. And Alex, you said you're 70. Well, if you're in good health and you're thinking, well, why the hell does it have to apply to me? Sort of thing. It's kind of raising up this whole issue, and I do a lot of talk, and I know Lynn Cox knows this as well. I sort of travel in these sort of the circles that are happening in the high science and science of aging and AI, and there's some really some fascinating discussions about all the stuff that you can do at the hot end of aging research. It's fascinating what you can do, but we're trapped by our own views. But I think there's a massive commercial opportunity. I think that point was made earlier by Adrienne, who's from the US. There's a massive commercial opportunity for those baby boomers who are basically, they've got money to spend, they want to have a good life. There's more and more opportunities for them to take charge. Now we've got all this science. There is, I think it'll be an interesting, but what we want to do is, and this is obviously what we're trying to do with the APVG, is to make sure that those benefits are as accessible to everyone as possible, recognizing the inequalities, all these sorts of things. So it's an interesting time, and I think ageism also is an issue that came up a little bit on the call, but I think is a massive problem. I mean, we can't really do anything when we've got this horrendous attitude towards older people, which is exactly why we had this, this media sort of attention last week on, over 70s being kept in lockdown. So these are all the sorts of issues that are really coming to the fore. So so the timing is right to kind of, So Robert, you wanted to say something. Sorry, I'm speaking too much now.
I don't want to take up more time than I should, but you raised a point to which I have a specific example of a wonderful project that we were able to work on. And it was funded, I'm going to give them a plug because they earned it. It was funded by the ASDA Foundation. I was working with the astonishing, sadly now retired, but still astonishingly wonderful Professor Paul Clark, on a professor of education focused on sustainability and social justice. And we got 38 infant schools in Burnley, Lancashire, growing food in their playgrounds in recipes made from planks from skip braiding trips that someone must have facilitated. And but what was most interesting of all, and the reason I'm coming back on the points I'm hearing made by you two women who've spoken most recently in this, is that what it really kicked off was when the 8-year-olds growing the food began to notice that the intergenerational was happening, that their grandparents, some of whom had not worked for decades in some of the worst urban poverty, it was an urban poverty project initially, their grandparents out to grass former miners who knew how to double dig a vegetable plot because that former miner was taught by his grandfather how to do that, would be going back in, working with his grandchildren and even his great-grandchildren and getting fitter, feeling like he was part of the community, somebody of value again to his children and his children's children and even his children's children's children and so on. But mental health issues began to ease off because, the depression that goes with loneliness or feeling useless and no longer valued was beginning to lift. And we started, sadly the funding came to an end before we could go as far as we would have wished, but maybe we can now look again at this model. The public and primary and secondary health care benefits, the social care benefits, the mental health care benefits began to accrue to several generations, just from starting off 38 infant schools, year 3 pupils, growing food, and then inviting the grandfathers and the grandmothers and the mothers and the fathers and all these other people to get involved. They started opening up farmers market projects in school. There's so many spin-off benefits, and
absolutely,
just put the numbers together with the narrative, and the grandmas finally saying, "We're going back to the pingo because it's safer on the streets." Because the older sisters no longer having to mug and burden to fund drug habits quite so much because they're setting up farmers markets with their younger siblings. All the stuff the little ones are growing, and it's just it all begins to ripple out in a positive upward spiral rather than a negative downward spiral, and we just begin to join these dots.
So, does anyone want to comment on that? Because I just a quick point before someone else wants to jump in. But what I've noticed with this whole kind of COVID experience, and I'm sure many of you have found this as well, I've seen a huge increase in the community kind of activism, on my front doorstep. I mean, it's extraordinary what I've seen happen. And even with, on my local, so we had a neighborhood kind of like WhatsApp group. It's so interesting just to see all the spin-off stuff that's happening in our neighborhood, which would never have happened before COVID. And even with, I think it's called Neighbor Next Door or something, which I signed up to. And so I get all this stream of stuff. And, you're here, and I see a lot of sort of people in our local areas all swapping notes or going into business, doing things together or whatever it might be. It's this whole spark of stuff that is starting to take off within our local sort of areas, which I think is so interesting. And it's to your point, Robert, you kind of like want these sort of organic, kind of locally kind of community driven things. And so that's the one thing that I hope we can bottle up and see more of. And I hope that will also feed into some of the thinking that I know the Health of the Nation was really keen on, is to take some of our kind of, I guess, the ideas that we kind of developed sort of at a national kind of level, but to take it out to the regions and really focus on, like, I know Wigan's been, called out a lot, but there's so many other examples like that can be supported and nurtured and are going to be key to, success moving forward in this whole kind of quote unquote leveling up agenda. And especially, with money is going to be tight, we're going to have to kind of go back almost to like old, in the old days, these principles of, just being supportive, being kind and supportive and caring in your communities. I mean, hopefully that, these are the sorts of things, which might come up. And that goes back, I think, which is what we're going to examine in the next roundtable. It's the sort of the values, what are the values that we want to kind of nurture and sort of drive, this new thinking. It kind of goes to the heart of that. Vanessa, you wanted to say something.
So it's really interesting what you say. I normally live in London and I'm currently stranded in Brussels during COVID. And it does feel like this old make, do and mend kind of attitude. And I feel like what's happened is we've all gotten very busy, haven't we? We've gotten too busy with work. We've gotten too busy with family. Everybody's scheduled within an inch of their lives. And as heartbreaking as COVID has been, it's given a lot of us time. And all of a sudden, when we have time, you see all these wonderful sort of community initiatives and people trying to help each other. Doing shopping for neighbors, and here we are, going to the local farmers market just one street over. Everyone is exercising, everybody's eating better because of time. And I think that's something that's quite interesting, that we're reverting to somewhat better habits when we have that time, which we wouldn't normally have. What's going to happen when we only work. Very interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting. I mean, you have to look at all the side effects. I mean, for one, I haven't been so well connected to my family in years because of my weekly Zoom calls. I mean, I never used to call. I mean, I've got a sister in Vancouver and a mother in Copenhagen, and we're all split around the world. And it's really interesting, some of the side effects that have happened. But yeah, so I think these are the sort of things that, I hope, and this is kind of goes back to the point, let's not waste the crisis. Let's really build on some of the things that are really magical coming out of this, and making sure that we don't just go back to the old status quo. I mean, everyone keeps talking about the new normal, but what is going to stick in this new normal? That's what we need to look at and make sure it happens, and going back to Manfred's point too about implementation, we've got to find the right way of implementing, this new normal that, hopefully works for more people, and so yeah, I mean, fascinating discussions. I know we're almost an hour. This is even longer than the longer informal chat than the first roundtable. But any sort of other I guess last words before we, because we could probably go on for days. These are also important issues. Any other ideas, thoughts, before we sort of close? Okay. Well, listen, it's been absolutely fascinating, and Vanessa actually, she's volunteered to help me on on pulling together some of all these notes. So thanks very much to Vanessa, who will be hugely credited in the follow-up report, of course.
It's such a pleasure, honestly.
So thank you. So that's something to do while you're stuck in Brussels. So I think there's a lot of work and thinking to do before the next roundtable, and I'm very grateful to Vanessa for helping in that sense. We've got a huge amount of chats. We do look at everything. I had a look at all the comments that came back from the follow up. So everything will be looked at and poured over. And so look forward to the next roundtable, and really hope we come to some really interesting kind of point of view about how we move this forward. So by the fourth one, and then of course we'll have a kind of a summing up kind of at the final Longevity Leaders Conference on the 22nd. We'll invite back some of our some people who've been involved throughout the process, and we'll do a formal kind of sort of presentation on what's really come out of this. So but thank you so much for all of your input and support. It's really hugely appreciated, and until the next one. So thank you so much. So Paul and Terry, I guess we can finish the call now. And Vanessa, I will send you the recording very quickly. So thanks all of you. Cheers.
Thanks, Tina. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Tina. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.